This is NFL Price Check, guys. So it's a first look at Week 8 salaries. We're going to start at quarterback. Whose salary are you digging this week, Geoff?
Well, I guess I'm going to cater to my host here because I'm kind of digging Trevor Lawrence's salary.
Oh, my God.
Anytime a quarterback is 5,500 against the Seattle Seahawks right now, you should probably consider playing him. It's a team that's allowed the 4th most passing yards against so far. Realistically, even in a low-volume passing game last night, they made Jameis Winston look pretty good. Jameis also almost ran for a couple touchdowns. That could have been a lot bigger night, but all things considered, in a 13-point game, he still pushed for over 16 DraftKings points. Again, you're going to see Jacksonville throw the ball more than New Orleans did because everybody throws more than New Orleans. And the one thing I really do like about Lawrence lately, the rushing, man. I mean, it is there. He only had 11 yards in his last outing, but before that, 7, 8, 6 rushes. This guy's getting it done. He had 2 rushing touchdowns his last 3 games. Probably gonna, push for, again, over 30 yards against a bad Seattle defense. This is a really good spot to use Trevor Lawrence.
Okay, so AJ looks like he's going to get whiplash from how vigorously he's shaking his head now.
Wait, well, hold on. Can we get a headshot for Trevor Lawrence? He is literally the Lord and Savior of an NFL franchise, one of just 32 NFL teams on this planet. We don't even have a headshot. DK, we're better than that. I'll get it taken care of.
Maybe they just don't think he's going to last. Who knows?
Are you kidding me? And he's beautiful, too. Anyway, speaking
AJ,
of beautiful.
go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, I usually like to pay up for my QBs to try and eliminate some of the variance at the top of my top position there. But you have to consider how absolutely bad the Washington defense has been against the pass this season. League highs in both TDs and yards allowed, including 5 catches of 40-plus yards. All that to say, I'm going to consider paying down and going with Teddy Bridgewater at 5,400 here. Look, if you take that Baltimore game out of the equation, he's actually having a relatively decent season. 5 games with 2 or more TDs, 4 games of 250-plus yards. Teddy Bridgewater's numbers aren't terrible, and Washington is just the prime matchup, I think, weekly at this point for QBs. And at 5,400, I think you absolutely have to look Bridgewater's direction.
All right, Pearce, what are we thinking?
Teddy Bridgewater, Trevor Lawrence. That tells you everything you need to know about this position and this slate in general. It's pretty ugly. You can pay up for some safety, or you can go down and take some of these ugly plays. And typically in these ugly slates, these are the guys that are more efficient and they're better point per dollar plays. So I'm going to stay with AJ's game. I'm going to go to the other side, take Taylor Heineke. Denver is just as bad. It's week 8. Your DVOA is what your DVOA is. And they allowed, 21 passes, 21 completions of 33 passes, 199 yards to Case Keenum, who was a spot emergency starter without his starting running backs, with a banged-up offensive line. They couldn't get the job done. Heineke in his last start against Green Bay, 268 passing yards, 95 rushing yards. He's gone over 40 rushing yards in 3 of his last 4 games. He's basically beardless Ryan Fitzpatrick. I mean, that's who he is. And when you play Ryan Fitzpatrick at this price against a bad defense. So I like Heineke. I know it's scary, but everybody we mentioned so far is scary.
Yeah, you're right about that. Is it Halloween yet?
Lawrence, Bridgewater, and Heineke. What's going on today, guys? Are you guys okay? This is weird.
Here.
I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm feeling great, man.
Great. You're always doing great. Is Mercury in retrograde again?
I heard Mercury is in Gatorade, so.
All right.
Things always get a little dicey when Saturn is in.
Let's go to running back,
vitamin water.
Shall we? Price check for us there, please, Pearce.
Kenneth Gainwell, $5,000. Maybe this one's scary as well, but Miles Sanders, high ankle sprain. He's probably going to be out a couple weeks. One thing we do know that we don't need to worry about is Detroit's run defense is terrible. They've allowed 6 rushing touchdowns. They've allowed 6 receiving touchdowns to running backs, the 3rd most points to running back. I guess if we're trying to get spooky and scary, one of the concerns is that Philadelphia doesn't give the ball to their running backs enough. And we can see Jalen Hurts poach all the touchdowns here. But if you look at the Philadelphia line, when it comes to run blocking for the running backs, they're getting 4.7 yards per carry, so the line's doing the job. And then if you look at last week against the Raiders, which was a negative game script, Philadelphia was down by a ton of points, and still they gave the ball to the running backs 18 times. That's a good step forward. Kenneth Gainwell should be able to get there based on the volume in this great matchup. You got to worry about Boston Scott. You got to worry about Hurts poaching the touchdowns. But through the air and on the ground at this price, it's not going to take much against a bad Detroit team.
All right, we have price check 4 players up to this point. Half of them do not have headshots. This is not like a value play segment. You can't just leave $15,000, $20,000 on the table.
Apparently
you got to
can.
spend it here.
No,
but
Wait till we get to tight end.
Oh,
Pearce starts
Lord
picking
have
off
mercy.
Tight end threes that aren't even on the roster, man. I mean,
okay, all right. Well, hey, Geoff, take us to your running back then. Maybe your guy has a picture.
I'm gonna throw a little class into the mix here. Let's go with Joe Mixon at 6,900. I mean, Joe Mixon really hasn't. He's starting to split carries with Samaje Perine, but he's still the main back there. He's the lead. He's the early down back, especially early in the game, and they're playing the Jets. So if you watched the game last week, you know what Damian Harris did. He went nuts on about 15 carries. I see a similar outcome here for Joe Mixon. Going to get those early down works. Did break off a long 20-yard touchdown late in the game last week against Baltimore, who also isn't great against the run. But the Jets are just getting pummeled by opposing running backs. They can't hold up late in the game to all these carries. And the same game script is going to happen here. Cincinnati's a solid defense. Who knows who's going to be starting at quarterback? So Joe Mixon should be in a high-volume spot to get some carries on the ground. Yeah, he doesn't catch receptions anymore. Who cares in this spot? It doesn't matter because he's probably going to have a great shot at hitting over the 100-yard bonus here. Looks a little bit too cheap considering the opponent.
AJ, which running back has a price you cannot pass up?
Well, you asked for us to spend some money, so here we go. Derrick Henry, 8,900. Top of the price range. Let's not overthink this, guys. 10 touchdowns. That's 4 more than the next closest player. 124.1 yards per game. I think he's worth taking a shot in here. Yeah, okay, the Colts are having a pretty good year in terms of run defense. They've only given up 2 TDs all year round, long, but that's only going to maybe scare a few people away between the price tag and the defense that he's facing, the matchup concerns. I don't have any concerns about it. I expect him to keep rolling, keep running downhill, and he'll rack up some more points.
All right, let's move on to wide receiver, AJ. Who you going with here?
Well, I'm going to stick with the same game, but I'm going to flip teams here at wide receiver and go with the Colts' #1 target, Michael Pittman, for 5,300. No team has allowed more DraftKings points to wide receivers this season than the Titans at 49 DraftKings fantasy points per game. They're also giving up 11.4 yards per reception. I think it's a good spot to target Pittman or even Zach Pascal if you want to go further down the list. Either one of these guys is a viable option against that questionable beat.
All right, wide receiver. Who do we like, Geoff?
Well, I was going to mention Michael Pittman, but there are some dudes in the 6K range who I think also that a lot of these guys are going to be under-owned. I mean, you got DK Metcalf playing with Geno Smith. You've got Keenan Allen in kind of a rough spot. I actually prefer Deontay Johnson here. Cleveland, for how good their pressure rate is and how good their defense can look at sometimes, they can also just come apart at the seams. And you look at Deontay Johnson. I mean, he is the Pittsburgh Steelers offense. The dude has got 12 or more targets in 3 of his last 4 starts. I mean, we crave this kind of volume. I don't care how bad Ben Roethlisberger is playing here because he's going to throw the ball to Deontay Johnson 10-plus times in this spot. And as I mentioned, Cleveland, they can fall apart in the secondary a little bit. 9 touchdowns already to the wide receiver position. So I think Deontay Johnson at 6,700 isn't going to be super highly owned. But when you start to look at target share and realistically just what the Browns do good and what they're not necessarily good doing against, and that's sometimes limiting these receptions to high-end wide receivers, I think Deontay Johnson at 6,700 is a little bit too cheap, especially when you stack him up like who he's stacked up against in this range. So I think that's a play who you should really keep an eye on this week, especially for the big fields where he's probably not going to be that popular.
All right, Pearce, who are you rolling with at wide receiver?
Scary Terry McLaurin, $7,600. Denver's allowed a 40-yard or longer pass 7 times this season. That's the worst in the NFL. McLaurin caught a 40-yard bomb last week, 7 catches for 122 yards. He also dropped a touchdown pass. You always worry about that with McLaurin, or just bad passes coming his way through Heineke. Denver blitzes a lot. They're one of the top teams when it comes to blitzing. They've got a pretty high adjusted sack rate, but their pressure rate's not that high. Their knockdown rate's not that high, and they pay the price. When they don't get to the quarterback, they give up these big passes, and they give up a lot of yards through the air. This can be noticed with their bad pass DVOA. They've got some familiar names in the secondary: Kyle Fuller, Pat Surtain, Bryce Callahan. But just because they're familiar doesn't mean that they're good or they're supposed to be good. It doesn't matter. This is week 8. They're not playing well. They all have low PFF grades. This is a team that you can attack. McLaurin has 747 air yards this season, so you've got a deep threat against a team that allows deep passes. If you're trying to win a GPP, you need those big plays. This could definitely bust with this quarterback, but this also could be another big boom play.
All right, guys, let's pick up the pace just a little bit here on tight end. Geoff, I got to start with you because you teased it a few players ago. Here, who's your guy at tight end?
Head down to the creek, get out your bait and tackle box, and roster Adam Troutman this week. 2,700.
Oh my
Teams
God.
against Tampa Bay, what do they do? They throw the ball. No one throws the ball than opponents playing Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Troutman's basically their wide receiver too right now because they don't really have anyone other than Marquez Callaway, actually other than Alvin Kamara to catch the ball. 3 targets. He set season highs in targets the last 2 games. I actually really like this play at 2,700.
All right, Pearce.
Ricky Seals-Jones, 3,800. I know 3 Washington players. What's wrong with me? But the Washington scheme or system, or maybe it's Tyler Heineke, they love going to the tight end. You got to look out. Logan Allen might be back, but if Logan Allen's back, he's cheap as well. You can't avoid this volume. We're always wanting the touchdown from a tight end. Rarely do you get volume this cheap. This is cheap volume.
Okay, AJ, bring us home.
I'm going to stack with my QB recommendation here, and I'm going to go with Noah Fant for 4,900. He's the 5th most expensive tight end on the board, sure, but he's also the number 2 target behind Cortland Sutton for the Broncos. And clearly Bridgewater likes him as his second best option here. So got to pair those 2 up.